Find out, how does Sterling compare to what United already have in their squad?
Well, yesterday night on Soccer Special, Troy Deeney on the panel said if Raheem Sterling was to make the move to Old Trafford, then he would be better than what they already have in those positions. So very interesting to then compare them. Just worth noting before we look into some of the players here, Ahmad, who of course has been playing a right midfield, or right wing I should say, for United, he of course didn't play too much last season, so he's not here, but we'll show you three other options United have at their disposal. Looking at games played, of course, Raheem Sterling played quite a lot for Chelsea last season, whether that was on the left wing or the right wing. Compared to the others, they all played a decent amount of games, but let's go on and find out a bit more about how they performed last season in the Premier League. Raheem Sterling got a few goals last season, and he has done consistently for Chelsea last season. Anthony, perhaps, as we know, struggled a little bit towards or throughout the season to find his best form. But Marcus Rashford, Alejandro Garnacho, playing predominantly on the left wing, both contributed to United, but perhaps Garnacho a bit more consistent. Let's look at the assists. In terms of that, it's probably not a lot really to look into that, really, in terms of to differentiate between these players. The only thing I would probably highlight is Marcus Rashford perhaps didn't really reach those levels of previous seasons last year, and Anthony again struggling, but Raheem Sterling, Garnacho perhaps in front as we go through last season. Looking at the minutes per goal, again, we've already talked about Anthony's struggles last season, but Raheem Sterling here, 247.6 minutes per goal, but his games played were slightly lower. You look at Marcus Rashford, Garnacho, who predominantly played on the left wing, were perhaps a bit more consistent on that front as well, considering they played more games. Chances created now, and this is where I would probably draw my own conclusions, because I think when you look at Alejandro Garnacho, of course he has played a lot of games for someone so young, but he's really made that left wing position his own when he's had the opportunities. You look at Raheem Sterling, he's able to do a little bit as well on both wings, considering he did change position a little bit. The other two, Anthony and Marcus Rashford, not so much. But let's look at touches in the opposition box next. And again, I think this is where, when it does come up, Alejandro Garnacho, when it does come up, it's absolutely fine. But what I will say is, when we did look at those stats earlier, Garnacho was really leading the four of them again. And for me, Raheem Sterling could be a good addition because he can play both wings, of course. But for me, if that maybe stumps Garnacho's progression, is it worth it? I mean, what do you both think?
I've been surprised that Garnacho has not started the season for Manchester United, given his productivity last season. And whenever I watched Manchester United last season, I thought he was their best player. I was very, very impressed. So a little bit of a surprise that he sat out the first two games, albeit he's an excellent option for Manchester United to have from the bench. And maybe perhaps that tells you something about how good Diallo's been on the wing for him to have got the nod on the right-hand side. My concern would be, if you look at all those players other than Anthony, Sterling, Rashford, Garnacho, would you say that, Nabaid, that all of them, their best positions on the left?
Probably, and so then you've kind of got the problem of where does Sterling fit in, but as we saw at City, Sterling can play off the right. Sterling can also play through the middle, to be honest. I think the big key difference for me is he's a goal scorer, and Garnacho, although I completely agree, is probably Manchester United's most dangerous forward. He's still young, still often makes mistakes in front of goal. Rashford's been out of form, like Dan said. And then Anthony, as you've seen by the stats, isn't someone who's going to score goals for you. So Sterling might be the one that gets them into double figures from a forward perspective, and that might be useful. But as you just said there, I don't know if an out-and-out left winger is exactly what United need at this point.
Do you think maybe they're earmarking Sterling to be on that right-hand side based on what he did for Manchester City that couple of years where he played right, stayed very wide and came into the box and got on the end of things? And it was the same with Sane on the other side. But it's obviously very different doing that for Manchester City in that team to what Manchester United are at the moment. And even in those first two games, I'm still not really sure what Manchester United are.
Well, Erik Ten Hag has said that he's gone on record saying that he wants United to be the best transition team in the world. So does that suit Sterling?
I wouldn't say so. Sterling, like that Manchester City period, sort of benefited from back post chances, lots of balls being put into the box. United don't put the ball in from the left-hand side because unless Shaw's fit, which he hasn't been, Mazraoui's he's two-footed, but he's a right-footed left-back. He's not going to be someone who gets down the line and crosses it in. And then in transition, Raheem Sterling is not as quick as he once was. He's definitely going to be someone who's going to be waiting for chances to come his way in and around the box. I actually said this a few years ago, that I feel like long-term he might end up being a fox-in-the-box centre-forward. So I don't know whether Manchester United and the transitional signing of Sterling makes much sense in terms of what they're trying to do. But I think it sort of speaks to the fact that, yes, they've got Sancho, and they sort of want to let Sancho go. Can we get someone in place?
I mean, we've been talking quite a lot there about Raheem Sterling, Jadon Sancho. Obviously, Chelsea aren't the only team in the race for Sancho, because Juventus is still pushing to sign the player. They're expected to propose a loan deal that would incorporate a loan fee plus a percentage of the wages that they would be able to pay. Juventus's proposal would require United to cover a portion of Sancho's salary. It's thought United would require the loan fee as well to be a substantial one. How have United got on in terms of sales, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, actually, when you look at it, because we were talking a bit earlier about Scott McTominay getting close to his move to Napoli, and also Hannibal confirming his move. But when you look at what United have done in the last decade, it's really interesting reading, because actually, with McTominay's fee going through, this is actually their second best window in the last decade in terms of sales. And I think what you have to also acknowledge is, the likes of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Willy Kambwala are all part of that total as well. But what doesn't show up there are also the players who left at the end of last season, the likes of Rafa Varane, Anthony Martial, who left at the end of their contract. So wages-wise, they would have been off the books as well. So I think you do have to look at what United have done in terms of their new structure. Omar Barada in as CEO, Jason Wilcox as the technical director, and Dan Ashworth as the sporting director as well. They've been able to change United's strategy, and mentioned with Hannibal, we're seeing more of the likes of sell-on clauses that have been included in a lot of the players who have left the club. So you would hope, for United's point of view, in the future, they're going to recoup a bit more money if those players move on in the future. So it's a different strategy, and clearly it's worked so far.
We start with what could be an incredible transfer involving Jadon Sancho and Raheem Sterling. Both Chelsea and Manchester United are in talks over two separate deals for the players. All deals are being discussed, so that means a loan with an obligation, and a permanent deal, all on the table right now. Chelsea's proposal to United was always going to involve a player moving in the other direction. It's thought Ben Chilwell and Sterling were the players being offered. Any deal for Sterling would have to make financial sense for United, given the wages that are involved. So once again, we are heading towards a deadline day and talking about Jadon Sancho. If this happens, and when I say if this happens, it's Sancho to Chelsea, Sterling to Manchester United. Does it solve a problem that both sides have got right now?
Can I shock you, Dave? I
Go on.
like this for all parties, so both players, both clubs. I think this makes complete sense. I think you've got two players at their respective clubs that aren't in matchday squads at the moment. They're not going to get picked, and probably not going to get picked in the near future. Sancho to Chelsea, I think he's a good fit within the makeup of their squad in terms of the age profile of the players that Chelsea have been getting in over the past few windows. Obviously gets him back to London as well. I think Sancho, at this point, you were kind of touching on it the other day, this next move is massive for him. He needs to go somewhere and settle. I feel like Chelsea would be a better environment for him than Manchester United at the moment, given everything that's happened at Manchester United. For Jadon Sancho, for Sterling, it's clear that he's surplus to requirements. If you look at Manchester United's window, what they've actually done is they've been signing a lot of players, not younger players with high level experience, players that have played at the highest level, and Raheem Sterling fits into that as well. It wouldn't be clear where he'd naturally fit into their 11 at the moment. You still feel like they're quite heavy on the left-hand side, not so heavy on the right. But saying that, Sterling played a lot of his best football at Manchester City from that right-hand side. So I just think, given where both clubs are at the moment, and given where both players are at the moment, I do think that everyone will be better off for this, if that makes sense.
I think also with regards to Raheem Sterling, apparently he's nicknamed at Chelsea as Uncle Raheem. And I think United probably could do with a bit of an uncle in the forward areas. I'm not saying he's an uncle, but that little bit of experience. Me and Dan were just speaking off air about Garnacho having to play off the right. Rashford still sort of being talked about as a youngster, and then two young strikers as well. You bring in someone like Sterling, who knows where the goal is, has scored for England, scored for Chelsea as well, to be fair, and Man City. Feels like a transfer that will really benefit him and also the rest of that front line.
Former striker Troy Deeney said on this channel last night that Sterling is better than everything United have right now. Do we agree with that? Troy Deeney saying that Sterling is better than everything United have got?
I think what Nubaid said there is really accurate, especially when you look at the options Manchester United have at the moment. On the right, they have Ahmad and Anthony, and then on the left, as you mentioned, Marcus Rashford and Garnacho. I think the obvious comparison perhaps Troy Deeney would be looking at is Marcus Rashford. He started the last 2 Premier League games, and I think when you compare his statistics to when Raheem Sterling joined Chelsea in 2022, you know, they're pretty similar in a lot of ways. You look at the goals, of course, Marcus Rashford has a few more, assists are similar. But I think, you know, what this graphic doesn't really show us is Marcus Rashford has been really out of form in the last year, you know, and I say that in, you know, not in a disrespectful way, but we saw his purple patch after the World Cup in Qatar, and he's really struggled to rediscover that form. So I think, you know, actually on the balance of it, you'd probably want Alejandro Garnacho as a young player to be coming into United starting on the left, but in the first 2 Premier League games he's persisted with Rashford. So does adding Sterling, who would predominantly want to play on the left, you would imagine, add to that, or would that create a bit of a what do you do with 5 wingers? I think we'd have to find out, really.
Yeah, it was interesting, those stats, I think, from the comparison anyway between Rashford and Sterling since Sterling joined Chelsea. I think, you know, Dan touched on it a little bit there as well a moment ago, talking about environment for Sancho. You know, it feels like it's over for Sancho at United right now. What type of environment do we think that Sancho needs to thrive?
I think it's really difficult to tell, to be honest, because he goes to Borussia Dortmund, a club where he really thrived, where he sort of made his name, and I thought that environment was perfect for him. So in my mind, I actually thought that would be his eventual destination. Obviously, then Ten Hag mentioned that they've patched up. I don't know how true that was, looking at the evidence now. But then he goes to Chelsea, and where I agree with Dan to an extent in terms of like player profile could make a lot of sense. There's a lot of players at Chelsea that play right and left, meaning he's leaving United where he's competing with Rashford and Garnacho, and now he's going to Chelsea where he's competing against potentially Palmer, Noni Madueke, Pedro Neto. They've got a lot of wide forwards and generally just a lot of forwards. But I think in terms of environment, if Enzo Maresca wants a player, he tends to treat them quite well. Players tend to speak very highly of him, so that might work in his favour. I do think in this deal, he's probably the one that's kind of going, I probably didn't mind just going back to Dortmund again.
I think Sancho maybe has suffered at Manchester United by them. I think over the last few years, or ever since he's been there, you wouldn't say Manchester United have had a set framework or a way of playing. Nabaid touched on it there, that I think Chelsea under Maresca will have that. Maresca showed at Leicester that he has his methods, he has his ways, and he'll pick his team and base his team around his own methods. Maybe Sancho finally having a little bit of structure back in the Premier League would help him.
Yeah, I think also added to that point, Enzo Maresca loves technicians, and although Sancho is a winger, he's a wonderful technician. The ball's stuck to his feet all the time, so he's got the athletic forward, so it might balance out that he now has a forward that is more ball dominant, a bit more of the Jack Grealish mould than like a Pedro Neto mode. But yeah, it's really difficult to tell because generally there's going to be competition, how much game time will he get, and so on and so forth.
I think the evaluation of both of these deals, as you mentioned, Dave, these would be 2 separate deals between the clubs for both players. And I think when you look at Sterling's contract, he has 3 years left at Chelsea, Sancho has 2, but Sancho's still just 24 years old. You know, you still look at the potential left in his career, the heights he could still potentially reach. So it'll be really interesting to see what the valuation on the players will be in terms of the value, because Enzo Maresca has already made it clear that Raheem Sterling isn't going to be part of his 20 or so, 25 squad that he's working with. Whereas Erik Ten Hag has taken the alternative stance of saying Sancho's very much part of our plans. You know, we've put the past behind us. He's just not making the matchday squad, but I'll have players throughout the season who will miss out. So it'll be really interesting to see how these 2 clubs, if a deal is to progress, how they kind of work out where the evaluation of these players are going to kind of rest at.
I think maybe if, let's say, Sancho went to Chelsea off the back of just being at Manchester United, you probably ask a little bit more questions around the move. But because he had that loan spell last season at Dortmund, because he played so well in that Champions League run, people have kind of remembered that there's a brilliant footballer there, and he is more than a winger, like Nabaid said. So I actually do think if Chelsea are going to have a lot of games as well, they're going to have the Conference League. You're going to see a lot of different players playing for Chelsea. This could actually be the kind of thing that he does need. I think in an ideal world, he probably does go back to Dortmund, but we know he doesn't really fit into how Dortmund do their transfer business. That was a one-off opportunistic loan that Dortmund took up on him last season. But he definitely needs a fresh start. I think being in London, where he's from, will probably help him, maybe help him feel a bit more settled, because he kind of felt settled over the last few years with the way his career's been.
There could still be other incomings at Chelsea as well in the next couple of days. Chelsea have made a move to sign Ivan Toney from Brentford. Chelsea are after a proven goal scorer to be their new number 9, and have been also linked with a move for the Napoli striker Victor Osimhen. And now Gianluca Di Marzio at Sky Italy said last night that Chelsea are willing to send their first offer to Napoli in the upcoming hours for Osimhen. Chelsea, it seems, pushing hard for a number 9 in the next couple of days. If it was a straight shootout between Ivan Toney and Victor Osimhen, who would you prefer to have?
I think from Chelsea's perspective, what they need from a number 9 is someone that's... No one guarantees goals because moves can go in different ways, but I feel like Toney is more of a sure thing for Chelsea than Osimhen at the moment. I think Osimhen's had a difficult 12 months. I think his stock has fallen. I think there's more question marks over Osimhen than there would have been 12 months ago. I think with Ivan Toney, he's probably not a pure goal scorer like Osimhen, but what I think he does do, I think he's a very, very good facilitator. If you look at what Chelsea are building in the front positions in terms of the players that play wide and the players that play number 10, I think there's potentially a lot of goal and assist output from the players that play in those positions. And what I think Toney does as a number 9, I think that would be more beneficial to the players that Chelsea have in the building already than what I think of Osimhen. Also, I think Jackson, you don't want to stunt his development. I think there's a good striker there in Jackson. I probably didn't think that when he first joined, but at the second half of last season, I started to watch more of him and think, yeah, there's something to work with here. I think if Osimhen comes in, I think they've got too many similar traits, and I think that would harm Jackson. I think with Toney, they're completely different strikers. So although Jackson probably wouldn't play every game, I think he's more likely to get football with Toney there because they're different types of players. So for me, if it was me in charge of Chelsea, I'd want Toney.
I'm split because I think although there is the argument that Ivan Toney is potentially a sure thing, he does score a lot of penalties, and I don't think Cole Palmer's going to give up pens anytime soon. And Osimhen, as I was told by one of my friends, is almost allergic to taking pens, so they won't have that debate. But I do see the argument of bringing other players into the game, but then I also think Chelsea can have so many creative players that actually just having a man who's in the box and wants to score goals in Osimhen might also work. In reality, it's a phenomenal problem to have. You've got Ivan Toney, who's a Premier League proven player, and Victor Osimhen, who I feel like probably with all the noise going on at Napoli is kind of going like, my time here is done. I've won the Scudetto for them. He's a hero over there. Now can I go and do this elsewhere? And I think Chelsea feels like a really good place for that to happen, because although obviously Nicholas Jackson is there, you'd imagine he'd come in and be the number 1 straight away.
Yeah, Napoli tend to be fairly difficult to do transfer deals with. They're always tough negotiators. 2 days to go then. What's the feeling? Do you think that Chelsea will get a striker over the line before the deadline?
I mean, you said it there, Dave, when we were talking about Ivan Toney initially, that Chelsea want a proven number 9 goal scorer before the deadline. So it sounds like they definitely want one. But having watched them against Wolves, yes, Wolves defensively were a bit shaky in the second half, but you look at kind of all the creativity, Dan, you mentioned all the talent they have already in-house. I think we have to also strip it back to what are the expectations for Chelsea this season. It will be a Champions League spot, I think, would be successful for them. You look at the squad they have, you would think that the talent in that squad can definitely do that. I look at the 4 that ended that game: João Felix, Pedro Neto, Cole Palmer and Noni Madueke. I mean, that front 4 is going to trouble quite a lot of defences this season. Now, whether Nicholas Jackson and Felix score the goals themselves, we'll see. But there's definitely enough goals, I think, in that team to challenge for top 4 and, to play some really interesting football. And I agree with you, Dan, in terms of I don't want to see Nicholas Jackson's development stunned, because I think there's definitely a player there. He's only 23 years old. And I think between him and Felix playing perhaps a false 9, they definitely have enough options there.
I'd say the only slight problem that Chelsea might have is, when else are you going to have a number 9 like Osimhen or Ivan Toney actually available to buy when there's not that much competition? I think the temptation is probably where Chelsea are going. We could get Osimhen in through the door and no one's going after him, so I'd be tempted. And obviously it's a transfer show, so I just want more transfers.
Sterling's potential move could lead to a significant dilemma for Manchester United. Manchester United is currently exploring a surprising transfer move for Raheem Sterling, which could see the out-of-favour Jadon Sancho heading to Chelsea in a swap deal. Just 3 years ago, Sterling, Sancho, and Marcus Rashford were central to England's near triumph in a major tournament, representing the bright future of English football. However, fast forward to today, and all three find themselves at a crossroads in their careers. Sancho, once a highly touted talent after his explosive stint at Borussia Dortmund, has struggled to replicate that form at Old Trafford and now finds himself surplus to requirements under Erik ten Hag. United is keen to offload him, especially after his fallout with the manager last season, and the club has identified Chelsea's Sterling as a potential replacement. Chelsea, on the other hand, is eager to reduce their wage bill and sees moving Sterling as a step towards achieving that goal. Sterling, with 123 Premier League goals to his name across stints with Liverpool, Manchester City, and Chelsea, brings a wealth of experience and a proven track record in big games. His potential arrival at Old Trafford could inject some much-needed dynamism into United's attack. However, the move is not without complications, particularly when considering Rashford's position in the team. Rashford, who has been a mainstay on United's left wing, would face increased competition from Sterling, who also favors that position. This could lead to a selection dilemma for Ten Hag, especially with the rise of young talents like Alejandro Garnacho, who has been pushing for more starting opportunities. If Sterling were to outshine Rashford, it could put the latter's future at the club in jeopardy, especially given Rashford's inconsistent form and off-field distractions last season. This potential swap deal, while it might solve some immediate issues for both United and Chelsea, could create long-term challenges for United, particularly concerning Rashford's role in the team. The addition of Sterling would add more competition on the left wing, and if Rashford finds himself slipping down the pecking order, it could lead to significant decisions during the 2025 summer transfer window. Rashford's status as the poster boy for United's academy has already waned, and his relationship with the fans has become strained. If Sterling's arrival leads to Rashford's diminished role in the team, it might push both the club and the player towards a parting of ways, a move that would be made reluctantly but could become necessary. Once such a separation occurs, it's difficult to see how the relationship could be mended. In the end, Sancho, Sterling, and Rashford, all once considered the future of English football, now face uncertain and intertwined futures, with their careers potentially taking very different paths depending on the outcome of this transfer saga.